Barron Trump showed up to an NBA game but faced humiliation and taunts from the crowd. That all changed when Shaquille O'Neal intervened. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and let us know in the comments where you're watching us from. The black SUV pulled up to the glowing entrance of the stadium, its headlights slicing through the crowd gathered outside. Fans in colorful jerseys moved like restless waves, clutching foam fingers and cups of soda, their excited chatter blending into a steady hum. It was a typical pregame atmosphere, loud, frenetic, and charged with the anticipation of competition. But for Barron Trump, sitting in the back seat and staring through the tinted windows, the energy felt suffocating. He adjusted the hood of his sweatshirt and tugged it lower over his forehead. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A chance to enjoy the game and forget about the constant buzz of cameras and headlines. But as he watched the crowd, he saw the familiar signs: furtive glances, double takes, and the gradual spread of recognition. The driver stepped out and opened the door, breaking Barron's train of thought. With a deep breath, he slid out of the SUV, his tall frame immediately noticeable despite the casual clothes meant to help him blend in. The slight hesitation in his step betrayed the nerves he tried to conceal. Two security guards flanked him as he entered the stadium, their presence subtle but undeniable. Inside, the atmosphere shifted from chaotic to electric. The bright lights illuminated the polished hardwood court, and the faint squeak of sneakers during warm-ups echoed through the cavernous space. Fans leaned over railings, snapping photos and calling out to players already taking shots. Barron moved towards the VIP entrance, his eyes scanning the arena as though preparing for an ambush. He felt the weight of invisible eyes, even if no one had approached him yet. The guards directed him to his seat, a cushioned spot with a perfect view of the court, roped off from the general crowd. He sat down and tried to relax, but his pulse refused to slow. Around him, conversations ebbed and flowed, but he could sense them shifting as people noticed him. A woman, seated a few rows behind, whispered something to her companion, who turned and openly stared. Others nearby began doing the same, and within moments, the whispers turned into murmurs. Barron kept his gaze fixed on the court, pretending not to notice. He had learned how to project calmness, even when his stomach churned. Yet the murmurs grew louder. "Isn't that Trump's kid?" someone said, not even bothering to lower their voice. "He's tall, just like his dad," another added, and laughter rippled through the crowd. Barron shifted uncomfortably, but didn't react. He knew better than to give them what they wanted. A group of teenagers a few rows down turned their phones toward him, angling for the perfect shot. The flashes were subtle, but he caught them in his peripheral vision. Their muffled giggles felt like daggers, sharp and persistent. "Hey, rich boy, where's your golden ticket?" someone yelled from farther back, and this time the laughter was louder, bolder. Barron's hands clenched into fists, but he quickly relaxed them. He wasn't going to let them get under his skin. Not tonight. A shadow fell over him as one of the security guards leaned in. "Everything okay, sir?" Barron nodded, but couldn't shake the tightness in his chest. The crowd was still laughing. He turned and caught a few of the teenagers smirking, their phones still pointed at him. Then it happened. One of them walked down the aisle holding a drink. He moved too casually, and Barron had just enough time to realize what was coming before the boy stumbled and the soda splashed onto his jeans. "Oh, sorry, man," the boy said, grinning as his friends erupted in laughter. Barron froze, his ears burning. He looked down at the sticky liquid seeping into the denim, then back up at the boy, who was already walking away. More laughter. Phones clicked. The moment was captured. Barron stood abruptly, and the security guards stepped closer, their eyes scanning the area. He wanted to leave, to get out before things got worse, but he also knew what leaving would look like: a retreat, a surrender. The crowd sensed the tension. People leaned closer, their attention fully on him now. "Let's move to a private area," one of the guards said, placing a hand on Barron's shoulder. "No," Barron replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'll stay." But the damage was already done. The crowd wasn't letting up, and the sight of security only made it worse. Someone threw a crumpled napkin toward him. Others started shouting, "Daddy's boy can't handle it. Go cry to your mom." The guards were tense, clearly debating whether to escort him out despite his protests. Barron's heart pounded, and for the first time he genuinely wondered if he'd made a mistake by coming here. Suddenly, the crowd's noise shifted. A ripple of recognition swept through the arena, and Barron turned to see what had caused it. Towering above the seated fans, moving purposefully down the steps, was Shaquille O'Neal. His presence was magnetic, commanding instant attention. Dressed sharply in a blazer and dress shirt, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how much power he held. Barron's eyes widened as Shaq approached. He hadn't even known the basketball legend was at the game, let alone that he would come to his defense. Shaq reached Barron's seat and paused, scanning the crowd with a slow, deliberate gaze. The murmurs quieted. The laughter stopped. Without a word, Shaq extended his hand toward Barron. Confused but grateful, Barron shook it, and Shaq leaned in, speaking just loud enough for him to hear. "Stay cool, kid," he said. Then, with one sweeping motion, Shaq turned and gestured for a microphone. The crowd waited, holding its breath. And just like that, the tide began to turn. The hush that fell over the arena was almost as loud as the chaos that had preceded it. The crowd, which only moments ago had been a swirling storm of laughter, jeers, and snapping phone cameras, now sat in stunned silence. Shaquille O'Neal stood at the edge of the VIP section, his towering figure cutting through the tension like a blade. His eyes, dark and focused, swept over the crowd, demanding attention without uttering a single word. Barron Trump stood frozen, unsure whether to feel relieved or more exposed under the weight of the new attention. The soda that stained his jeans was still wet, and the echoes of laughter rang in his ears despite the sudden quiet. Yet, as Shaq gestured for a microphone, the balance of power shifted. Shaq's hand was steady as he took the mic from the nearest arena attendant. He turned slowly, his gaze deliberate, making eye contact with several sections of the crowd before he finally spoke. "Everybody chill," he said, his deep voice reverberating across the stadium. It was a simple phrase, but it hit like a hammer. The sound system amplified his words, giving them weight that could be felt in the chest. Conversations died down entirely, replaced by uneasy shifting in seats. Shaq looked directly at the group of teenagers who had been taunting Barron. He didn't need to single them out verbally. His gaze did the work for him. "This isn't how we act," he continued. "Not in my house." There was a murmur as people processed his words, and the subtle reminder of Shaq's long-standing ties to the NBA gave them pause. The arena wasn't just a place for basketball. It was a temple of sorts, a space where sportsmanship and respect were supposed to reign, and Shaq had just made it clear that anyone who stepped out of line wasn't welcome. Barron exhaled, feeling the tension ease ever so slightly. Shaq turned and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, the gesture grounding him. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like an anchor. The crowd's energy began to shift. Applause broke out in scattered pockets, hesitant at first but gaining momentum as more people joined in. It wasn't unanimous. Some spectators still wore defiant expressions, unwilling to let go of their hostility, but it was enough to take the edge off. Shaq handed the microphone back and turned his attention fully to Barron. "You good?" he asked quietly, his voice low enough that only Barron could hear. Barron nodded, but Shaq wasn't convinced. "Let's get you cleaned up." The security guards moved quickly, forming a protective barrier as Shaq led Barron away from the seats. Cameras flashed and whispers buzzed through the arena, but Shaq's presence kept things from spiraling out of control. In the hallway leading to the private lounge, the noise faded. Barron finally let out the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Shaq walked beside him, his long strides effortless, while Barron struggled to match his pace. Inside the lounge, Barron was handed a towel and a spare pair of pants. He changed quickly, grateful for the brief reprieve from the public eye. When he emerged, Shaq was waiting, arms crossed and expression thoughtful. "Listen, man," Shaq said, his voice softer now but still carrying authority. "What happened out there? That's not about you." Barron frowned. It felt pretty personal. "Because it was," Shaq admitted. "But not the way you think. People see your name and they make assumptions. Doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. They just need someone to point at. Someone to blame." Barron leaned against the counter, absorbing Shaq's words. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this, but hearing it from someone like Shaq, a man who'd faced his own battles with public perception, made it hit differently. "You can't control what people say about you," Shaq continued, "but you can control how you respond. You did the right thing staying put. Didn't let them see you sweat." Barron wasn't sure he agreed. He'd felt like running the entire time, but Shaq's confidence was contagious. Before Barron could reply, the door opened and one of the security guards stepped in. "They want you both back in the arena," the guard said. "The crowd's settled down and the game's about to start." Shaq looked at Barron. "You ready?" Barron hesitated, then nodded. When they stepped back out into the arena, the reaction was noticeably different. A few heads turned, but the outright hostility had faded. Shaq led Barron to a new seat, closer to the court and further from the teenagers who had started the incident. The game began, and for a while, it seemed like the worst was over. But Barron couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The whispers hadn't stopped entirely. They'd just shifted online. Shaq must have sensed it too, because during a timeout he leaned over and said, "Don't check your phone." Barron glanced down anyway. Notifications flooded his screen. Screenshots, comments, hashtags. The video of the spilled drink was already trending. "Looks like I'm famous," Barron muttered. Shaq's expression darkened. "Don't let them define you, kid. Trust me on that." Barron wanted to believe him. He really did. But as he scrolled through the comments, the words cut deeper than he'd expected. The rest of the game passed in a blur. Shaq stayed close, and the security detail kept watch, but the unease lingered. When the final buzzer sounded, Barron stood quickly, eager to leave before the crowd dispersed. As they made their way to the exit, a group of reporters had already gathered, microphones and cameras thrust forward, questions flying. "How do you respond to the incident earlier tonight? Do you think you were treated unfairly because of your name?" Shaq stepped in front of Barron, blocking the cameras. "This kid came here to watch a game," Shaq said firmly. "Let him have that." He didn't stop walking, and neither did Barron. They pushed through the throng, past the flashing lights and relentless questions, until they reached the SUV waiting outside. As the doors closed behind him, Barron finally felt safe. But he knew the story wasn't over. Not even close. The SUV's tinted windows blurred the neon lights of the arena as it pulled away, but Barron Trump barely noticed. He leaned back against the seat, his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket. He didn't need to check it to know that the video had spread far beyond the stadium. His image, soaked in soda, face strained but composed, was already plastered across headlines and social media feeds. Shaquille O'Neal sat beside him, scrolling through his own phone. Unlike Barron, he looked completely unfazed, as though he'd been through this exact scenario 100 times before. Perhaps he had. Barron envied his calm. "You don't have to look at it, you know," Shaq said without looking up. "That's the trick. Let it ride out. People will move on." "Will they?" Barron's voice came out sharper than intended. He took a breath, trying to keep his frustration in check. "I don't think they ever really move on. Not when it's me." Shaq finally looked up, his expression thoughtful. "They don't. Not completely. But you can't live your life worrying about what a bunch of strangers think. You'll never win that fight." Barron wanted to believe that. He wanted to shrug off the weight pressing down on him, but the reality felt heavier than Shaq's reassurances. He pulled out his phone and unlocked it, despite the warning. The first notification was a news alert. Barron Trump targeted in arena incident. Shaquille O'Neal steps in. The headline made it sound almost heroic, like Shaq had saved him from a burning building. But the comments told a different story. This is what happens when you flaunt privilege. Maybe he should have just stayed home if he can't handle the heat. Another spoiled brat playing the victim. Barron's stomach twisted. He scrolled faster, as if racing through the negativity would lessen its impact. It didn't. "I told you not to check," Shaq said, shaking his head. "You just gave them what they wanted." Barron looked up, his face burning. "What was I supposed to do? Just sit there and take it?" "Yeah." Shaq's tone was matter of fact. "Because it's not about them, it's about you. You think this is bad? Try missing free throws in the NBA Finals with the whole world watching." Barron wanted to argue, but he couldn't. Shaq had a point, even if it didn't make him feel any better. The SUV slowed as they approached the hotel, where another crowd of reporters had already gathered. Their cameras flashed against the windows, bright enough to make Barron flinch. "Ready for round 2? Shaq asked with a grin. Barron didn't answer. The lobby was worse than the arena. Journalists shouted questions as they pushed toward him, only to be held back by security. Barron kept his head down, following Shaq's lead as they moved quickly toward the elevators. Inside the suite, the tension finally broke. Shaq dropped onto the couch and grabbed the remote, flipping through channels until he found the game's post-show analysis. Barron stood near the window, staring at the city lights. "They're not going to stop, are they?" "Nope," Shaq said bluntly. "But you've got 2 choices, let it bury you or own it." "How do you own something like this?" "By flipping the script." Shaq muted the TV and turned to face him. "Right now, they're talking about what happened to you. But tomorrow, you make them talk about what you're going to do about it." Barron frowned. "And what exactly am I going to do?" "You'll figure it out," Shaq said with a shrug. "You've got the platform. Use it." The next morning, Barron woke to more headlines and notifications. But one post stood out. His mother's. Melania Trump. Official. Proud of my son for standing tall in the face of bullying. Thank you at Shaq for showing the world what true leadership looks like. It had already gone viral, drawing both support and criticism. Barron's stomach sank. It was one thing to deal with the arena crowd, but now the world was involved. He hesitated before clicking on the comments. Good for him. No one deserves to be treated that way. He's not a victim. Stop acting like he is. Another PR stunt. Typical Trump move. Barron shut off the screen and sank back against the pillows. Meanwhile, Shaq's interviews were already dominating morning talk shows. This wasn't about privilege, he told one reporter. This was about respect. We've all got a choice to be better, and last night, a lot of people chose wrong. His words resonated, sparking debates across networks and social media. Was the treatment Barron received justified because of his family name? Or was it an example of how bullying had become normalized, even among adults? Barron wasn't sure what to make of it. He watched clips of Shaq speaking with calm authority, fielding tough questions without flinching. It was impressive. Something Barron couldn't imagine himself doing. But maybe he didn't have to. Maybe Shaq was right. He didn't need to fight the noise. He needed to rise above it. Later that afternoon, Barron sat in the suite, staring at a blank document on his laptop. He typed and deleted several lines before finally settling on a statement. What happened last night wasn't about me. It was about something bigger. Too many people think it's okay to tear others down just because they can. I'm not going to let that stop me from standing up for myself, and for anyone else who's been made to feel like they don't belong. He hesitated before hitting post, his finger hovering over the button. Then he pressed it. The response was immediate. Supporters praised him for speaking out. Critics called it an overreaction. But amid the noise, something new emerged. A conversation about bullying, respect, and how society treated public figures. Shaq called him later that night. See, he said, you flipped the script. Barron didn't feel like the story was over. Not yet. But for the first time, he felt like he was in control of it. Barron sat at the edge of his bed, staring out the window, as the early morning sunlight poured into his hotel room. The events of the past 48 hours felt distant, like fragments of a bad dream he couldn't quite piece together. Yet, the reminders were everywhere. The unopened notifications on his phone, the news alerts flashing across the television, and the echoes of laughter that still lingered in his mind. He hadn't slept much. After posting his statement the day before, he had spent hours scrolling through reactions online, analyzing each comment as if it held the key to understanding how people saw him. Some messages were supportive, but the negativity always seemed louder. Words like entitled and crybaby stuck to him, no matter how hard he tried to brush them off. Shaquille O'Neal's voice rang in his ears. Flip the script. The words had sounded simple at the time, but putting them into practice felt overwhelming. How could he possibly take control of a situation that had spiraled so far beyond him? A knock at the door snapped him out of his thoughts. He stood and opened it to find Shaq leaning casually against the frame, a paper coffee cup in each hand. Thought you might need this, Shaq said, handing one over. Barron accepted it with a tired smile. Thanks. You look like you barely slept. Didn't. Shaq stepped inside and sank into the armchair by the window. I figured that's why I'm here. Barron raised an eyebrow. To bring me coffee? Shaq grinned. To make sure you don't spend the whole day feeling sorry for yourself. He gestured to Barron's phone. I saw your post. It was good. Barron sat down across from him. It doesn't feel like it made a difference. It's not about making a difference overnight. It's about starting something. And you did that. Barron sipped his coffee, letting the warmth ground him. So what now? Shaq leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Now? Now you keep pushing. You don't let this be the end of the story. Later that afternoon, Shaq arranged for a private tour of a local youth center where he volunteered. Barron hesitated at first. Stepping into another public space felt risky, but Shaq was insistent. You need to see what this is really about, Shaq had said. This isn't just about you. It's about what you can do with the platform you've got. When they arrived, Barron was immediately struck by the energy in the building. Kids raced through the hallways, bouncing basketballs and laughing as they chased one another. The walls were decorated with murals painted by local artists, bright colors and bold images that celebrated resilience and unity. A group of teenagers stopped when they saw Shaq, their faces lighting up with excitement. He greeted them with high fives and easy jokes, putting them at ease within seconds. Barron hung back, unsure how to join the conversation. But then Shaq waved him over. "This is Barron," Shaq said. "He's with me today." The kids stared at him with curiosity, and Barron felt his pulse quicken. He waited for the inevitable questions about his father, about his name, but they didn't come. Instead, one of the boys asked, "Do you play basketball?" Barron blinked. Not really." "You should," the boy said, tossing him a ball. "You're tall enough." Laughter rippled through the group, but it wasn't cruel. It felt normal. Barron relaxed slightly. Over the next hour, he watched Shaq mentor the kids, giving tips on their shots and encouraging them to believe in themselves. The more Barron observed, the more he began to understand what Shaq had been trying to tell him. It wasn't about proving himself to his critics. It was about showing up for the people who needed someone to stand with them. By the end of the visit, Barron had started joining in the drills, passing the ball and even attempting a few shots. The kids teased him good-naturedly when he missed, but he didn't mind. For the first time in days, he wasn't thinking about what people online were saying. That evening, Barron and Shaq sat down for dinner at the hotel, and the conversation turned serious. "You ever think about starting something?" Shaq asked. "Like what?" "Like a foundation, a campaign, something that's bigger than all this drama." Barron hesitated. "You think anyone would take it seriously?" Shaq gave him a look. "They'll take it seriously if you do." The idea stuck with Barron. He spent the next few days sketching out plans, bouncing ideas off Shaq, and reaching out to advisors. With Shaq's encouragement, he decided to focus on anti-bullying initiatives, programs that would empower kids to stand up for themselves and others. The official announcement came a week later. Barron Trump and Shaquille O'Neal unveiled their partnership in front of a packed press conference. Barron spoke first, his voice steadier than he'd expected. "I've spent my whole life in the public eye," he began, "and I've learned that sometimes people judge you before they even know you. But I also know that bullying doesn't just happen to people like me. It happens in schools, online, and even in arenas like the one we were in last week. That's why we're here today, to do something about it." Shaq followed, emphasizing the importance of mentorship and resilience. Together, they outlined their plans for workshops, school visits, and social media campaigns aimed at combating harassment and promoting kindness. The response was immediate. News outlets shifted their focus from the incident at the arena to the positive steps Barron and Shaq were taking. Critics still lingered, but their voices were drowned out by the support pouring in from parents, teachers, and students. Months later, Barron stood backstage at another event, waiting to address a crowd of high school students. Shaq was there too, offering a reassuring nod. As Barron stepped up to the microphone, he felt the same nerves he'd experienced at the basketball game, but this time he didn't run from them. "This isn't just my story," he began. "It's all of ours. And together we can make sure no one else feels like they're standing alone." The applause was thunderous, and for the first time Barron felt like he wasn't just the son of a former president. He was someone who had faced the fire and come out stronger. Subscribe to the channel not to miss new videos. Share this video with your friends and leave comments. Your opinion is important. Write in the comments where you're watching us from.